back from Paris. A budding friendship between the leaders of America and France on display during President Trump's trip overseas. Healthcare debate, why some pro-life Americans are split over the Senate bill to overhaul Obamacare. Charlie Gard, the debate surrounding an 11-month-old baby boy in London and why Pope Francis is fighting for him. An American student's unusual approach to helping victims of ISIS in Iraq. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, July 14, 2017. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump is back in the United States after a two-day visit to France. French President Emmanuel Macron hosted the president for the annual Bastille Day celebration today. This year, the event coincided with the 100th anniversary of the U.S. entry into World War I. Correspondent Mark Irons has more from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. The French president made a point of detailing both the long history of ties between France and America and the areas where he and Trump disagree. And President Trump is standing by our ally, saying America and France will never be defeated.
A Bastille Day parade this morning capped 2 days of Parisian glitz for the president and First Lady. Today, President Macron thanked the U.S. for turning the tide of World War I and for being one of its allies and friends.
Les États-Unis d'Amérique,
the United States of America are among them.
C'est pourquoi
and that is why
rien ne nous séparera
nothing
jamais.
Will ever separate us.
The leaders appear to have moved beyond a tense introduction in May. Their body language in Paris this week suggests the relationship has reached a new level. The fight against terrorism is an issue that unites the two countries, something President Trump highlighted.
We also face grave threats from terrorist organizations that wage war on innocent lives. Tomorrow will mark 1 year since a joyous Bastille Day celebration in Nice turned into a massacre. We all remember that, how horrible that was.
Macron made a smart move inviting President Trump.
An expert on transatlantic relations calls Macron a very savvy politician and says it was in France's strategic interest to extend the hand of friendship so early on to President Trump. Despite major differences on climate change and trade, there are areas of agreement.
Yeah, I think without a doubt you're going to see, some common ground when it comes to the war in Iraq and Syria. The broader fight against Islamist terrorism. After all, France is really on the front line of that fight.
In a statement released by the White House, President Trump says the United States and France are more united than ever and are working to destroy terrorist organizations by eliminating their safe havens, ending their financing, and eradicating their ideology. Wyatt.
Mark, President Trump kept a low profile last weekend's return from the G20. What can we expect to see of him this weekend?
Well, Wyatt, the president's golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey is hosting this weekend's U.S. Women's Open. He tweeted that he'll attend that tournament. Trump has spent several weekends at the club since his November election, but none have been during an event of this magnitude. 156 golfers will be there, and protesters are expected, in addition to thousands of fans.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thanks, Mark. And President Trump's travel ban has dealt another blow in federal court. A judge in Hawaii is expanding the list of family relationships that visitors from 6 Muslim-majority countries can use to get into the country. Under current rules, citizens from those countries have to prove a bona fide relationship with someone in the U.S. before they can travel here. President Trump is urging fellow Republicans to approve a health care plan in the Senate, declaring on Twitter, "It must happen." The president says Republican senators are working hard to get their failed Obamacare replacement approved, and I'll be at my desk, pen in hand. Trump also applauds Vice President Mike Pence for, quote, getting Republican senators to do what is right for the people. Republicans hope the vote on the new health care bill will happen next week. Before then, voters, medical organizations, and pro-life groups are doing everything they can to lobby senators. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has been speaking to some of them. Good evening, Jason.
Wyatt, Republican senators have no room for error today. Already 2 GOP senators are against the bill. If one more joins them, it dies. So critics and supporters of the bill have been here all week, making their voices heard.
Hey, buddy, can I have a high five? Thank you.
2.5-year-old Apollo Howell's parents learned he'd be born with serious health problems, including a hole between his airway and esophagus. Apollo's mom, Kate, tells me their insurance wouldn't cover all of his treatment, so Medicaid stepped in.
We were moving forward with faith in God, and what's really clear to me now is that we were moving forward with faith in our community, and that Medicaid is the mechanism through which our community is able to support us and to support so many mothers-to-be who are terrified.
Now the Texas family is lobbying senators to oppose the Republican health care plan.
The way that it would affect our family is drastic. It would threaten Apollo's life.
But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell defends cuts to Medicaid. He says the program needs reform.
We also want to strengthen Medicaid for those who need it most by giving states more flexibility while ensuring that those who rely on this program don't have the rug pulled out from under them.
And pro-life groups praise the GOP's latest effort to replace Obamacare.
We are right on the threshold of defunding Planned Parenthood.
They rallied at the Capitol this week and prayed outside Leader McConnell's office.
We pray, Lord.
These pro-lifers are happy the current bill would strip Planned Parenthood of Medicaid funds for 1 year.
I say there's other places that women can go for that help. There's no reason that it has to be a place that kills children. I'd rather my doctor be someone who respects all life at all stages and not just some.
And the pro-lifers you just saw in that video are from a group called Created Equal. They delivered a replica of a 12-week-old unborn baby to every single U.S. senator with a message to protect the pro-life provisions in this bill. Wyatt?
Jason, what role has the president played in the Senate negotiations?
President Trump has made phone calls to senators. He's had meetings with them. But he's also dispatched Vice President Pence here to the Capitol for some of the negotiations. But he's been largely on the sidelines. It's really up to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to pull off the bill's passage.
Correspondent Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thanks, Jason. Former President Jimmy Carter is out of the hospital after being treated for dehydration in Canada. The 92-year-old was volunteering in Winnipeg with Habitat for Humanity, a group that builds homes for people in need. The Carters are big supporters of the Atlanta-based charity. 2 years ago, they continued to volunteer even though the former president was being treated for cancer. Now he's said to be doing okay. Investigators blame 3 Palestinians for killing 2 Israeli police officers at Jerusalem holy site. It happened at the Temple Mount, a walled compound revered by both Muslims and Jews. A relative said that 3 attackers were devout Muslims who frequently visit the shrine. Police shot and killed them. The Temple Mount will remain closed for at least 2 days while investigators review security. Egypt mourns 2 deadly attacks. Officers arrested a man who attacked tourists in a resort in the Red Sea. He stabbed 2 Ukrainian tourists to death and wounded 4 other foreigners. Earlier, gunmen attacked a security checkpoint in Cairo, killing 5 officers near some of Egypt's oldest pyramids. It's not certain what sparked the attack. An American doctor who specializes in genetic conditions will travel to Britain next week to assess Charlie Gard. The 11-month-old baby's family is in a legal battle with a British hospital over whether trying an experimental treatment is Charlie's best interest. The hospital wants to end treatment without letting the parents decide. Now a judge says he's open-minded to new evidence from the physician from Columbia University. The case attracted international attention after President Trump and Pope Francis weighed in. Joining us now is Carter Snead, professor of law and political science at the University of Notre Dame. He's also director of the Center for Ethics and Culture and served as general counsel to President George W. Bush's Council on Bioethics. So, Carter, you wrote an op-ed for CNN entitled "Why Pope Francis is Fighting for Charlie Gard." Can you summarize the points you make?
Certainly. Pope Francis has joined Charlie Gard's parents in resisting the United Kingdom's court system, along with the hospital, to refuse his transfer for an experimental therapy, and most importantly, to terminate his life-sustaining measures, namely his ventilator, because the courts and the state have judged his life to be no longer worth living because of brain damage that they believe is irreversible. Pope Francis and Charlie's parents, on the other hand, really would like to pursue whatever options they might be able to relieve his symptoms. But more importantly, resist the idea that just because Charlie is looking at possibly at being cognitively disabled, that his life is no longer worth living, and therefore we should act with the intention of ending that life.
Well, you mentioned unduly burdensome. Let's take a closer look at that and the point that you wrote. You said, so long as there is a medical intervention available that is not unduly burdensome and will benefit the patients that Charlie is, not who we should wish him to be, we should do our best to see that Charlie and patients like him receive it. Why do you believe the temptation of death, in a sense, is greater than life, and how this sort of plays into the culture of death?
What we're seeing in this case is a strong temptation, and it's, I think, a well-meaning temptation in a kind of compassionate stance to try to relieve someone's suffering by eliminating their life. And that's something that that's a temptation we should resist. We should always distinguish between an intervention, a medical intervention that is unduly burdensome, that is one that causes pain or discomfort or a whole variety of other burdens might be possible, and a person's underlying condition.
Is Charlie's case a warning as to what is to come if we don't safeguard ethics in medicine?
I do believe that's correct. Again, there's a natural temptation rooted in compassion to terminate the life of someone who is suffering as a means of terminating their suffering. But in this case, you see, especially in the court decisions, a real focus on cognitive functioning, cognitive functioning as the standard for a life worth living. And we don't believe that a person's value is reducible to their cognitive functioning. And we have to defend folks who are disabled. And the only way to do that is to draw firm distinctions between interventions that might be burdensome or futile and a life that is difficult and is characterized by suffering.
Well, I know that on a surface level, these can seem pretty complicated, so it's really nice to get a Catholic approach to this, and you're being able to explain the value of life. Carter Snead, professor of law and political science at the University of Notre Dame, thanks so much for talking with us.
My pleasure.
Vatican prosecutors indict the former president and treasurer of its children's hospital for allegedly diverting money to renovate a cardinal's apartment. A Vatican court will try Giuseppe Profitti and Massimo Spina this Tuesday. They are charged with redirecting nearly $500,000. A new article in the Italian Jesuit journal says American evangelicals and conservative Catholics are forming what is called a strange alliance. The author is the editor-in-chief of Civiltà Cattolica. Father Antonio Spadaro says evangelicals and conservative Catholics share a fear of foreigners and Muslims. Joining us now is Francis Rocca, Vatican correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Frank, can you just give us a snapshot of Father Spadaro's article?
Well, the article denounces what it calls evangelical fundamentalism, which it really portrays as a movement, a theological and political movement that really isn't Christian at all. Very bellicose, very warlike, very materialistic, and aiming at a kind of Old Testament theocracy, and it says that when Catholics go into an alliance with these evangelical fundamentalists on issues like abortion or same-sex marriage or religious liberty issues, that they're engaging in an ecumenism of hate, because that's going to lead, they suggest, toward what they say is xenophobic, Islamophobic attitude that would be toward that warlike and anti-immigrant, and that really they say is very similar to actually what Islamic fundamentalists and even ISIS do. So it's a very stark picture.
I was going to say the article is certainly getting criticism on social media from American Catholics because of that. What are you hearing?
Well, I mean, I think that you're hearing a lot of objections that this is a distorted picture, that it's written by Father Spadaro, is an Italian priest, and his co-author, Mr. Figueroa, is an Argentine Presbyterian pastor. So neither is an American, and they're saying these people haven't spent a lot of time in the United States. They don't really understand the examples that they draw, that they cite for evangelical Christianity are not recent and not typical, and the same for on the Catholic side. They cite what they would say are extreme Catholic groups, not the mainstream of the conservative Catholics on political issues.
Father Spadaro outlines the approach Pope Francis takes. What is that way in his view?
Well, he says that Pope Francis, on the other hand, he says Pope Francis really is preaching the gospel, and as evidenced in the way he calls for inclusion, for building bridges, for tearing down walls. And they say, and it's not very clear, but they basically suggest that the church shouldn't be politically aligned. The church shouldn't be aligned with a political party or with a nation. It should remain above the fray.
Francis Rocco, Vatican correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, thanks so much for summarizing the article for us.
Thank you.
Coming up, national defense, why a U.S. missile system is challenging American ties with China, and preventing Christian persecution, how a new defense bill in Congress could help. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. High-ranking U.S. military officials say they've spotted a Chinese spy ship sailing off the coast of Alaska. That, according to a report from CNN, which states the ship may have been there for several days to observe Tuesday's THAAD missile defense test. Officials say the ship has been operating about 100 miles off the Alaska coast in international waters. It comes the same week China condemns deploying the THAAD system to South Korea, saying the U.S. risks global and regional stability.
China is essentially taking a page out of the Russian playbook in terms of opposing missile defense. But again, the THAAD system is a purely defensive system. It doesn't threaten Chinese offensive missiles like the Chinese contend that it might. They insist that the radar there would be able to see into their country, but we already can see into their country.
The U.S. Missile Defense Agency says the THAAD test was successful in shooting down a target over Alaska. A new defense bill passed by the House of Representatives would provide more money to help prevent Christian persecution in the Middle East. The bill also provides a 2.4% pay raise for troops and gives the Army money to add 17,000 new soldiers. It does not cut the funds for troops seeking transgender medical treatment, an amendment most conservatives wanted. Earlier this week, the House passed a bill to fight human trafficking.
We want law enforcement to have every possible resource to protect our citizens. And we want to give real support and a voice to the victims of these awful crimes.
Speaker Paul Ryan calls human trafficking a national problem that requires a national response. Bishop Joe Vasquez of Austin calls the bill an important step in the fight to abolish modern-day slavery. You can read his comments by going to our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. The president of Sudan is cutting off talks with the United States after the Trump administration delayed its decision to permanently lift sanctions. Joining us now is Dwight Bashir of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, a bipartisan federal commission dedicated to protecting religious freedom. So, Dwight, the extended sanctions require the government in Sudan essentially to stop the ongoing regional conflict, to improve humanitarian access throughout the country, to work with the United States on regional conflicts and confronting terrorism. Why do you think these sanctions are so important that they stay in place?
Well, first of all, what it doesn't account for is the horrific human rights and religious freedom situation. So, if the sanctions were lifted, it would send the signal that despite a deteriorating landscape for freedom of religion or belief, that the government is being rewarded. So I think it is an important indicator that there is a postponement here, get a chance to look more deeply and factor in the human rights and religious freedom situation.
You've also encouraged or recommended the U.S. government work with Sudan to repeal blasphemy laws. Tell me a little bit more about that and what the religious landscape is like in Sudan.
Yeah, well, it's a tough environment. First of all, if you're a Muslim and you're kind of not in the norm or kind of outside the normal understanding, you can also be targeted. But certainly for those who are not Muslim, if you insult anything within the Islamic landscape, you can be targeted, put in jail, fined, and penalized. So it's important that we send a signal that it's important to repeal these laws and also work with the government to help us make progress there.
This has been going on for a while. Your commission published a report about the state of religious freedom in Sudan. Last year, it said that 25 churches received notice that their church would be demolished by the government. How can the Sudanese government do that?
Well, unfortunately, they use kind of the zoning and permit excuses, but the reality is it's clear discrimination. They're going after these Christian houses of worship, and it's very clear that this is a campaign, and it needs to be stopped, and it's important that the administration speak out about that.
Really quickly, Dwight, I know that Christianity is only about 3% in Sudan, very small, tiny minority. What more can be done to advocate for their religious freedom?
Well, I think it's important, first of all, that the U.S. government speak out on as much as possible about the situation there. This is a small minority that's facing a severe situation. Churches demolished, people being put in jail. There was more than 100 pastors imprisoned over the past 4 or 5 years. So there needs to be a strong voice coming from the United States and international community to put on notice Sudan. They can't get away with this.
Dwight Bashir, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Thanks so much for talking to us about it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Up next, war refugees stand tall thanks to dance therapy, how an American college student is trying to lift their spirits. Today we celebrate the feast of St. Kateri Tekakwitha. She was born in 1656 in modern-day New York. The so-called Lily of the Mohawks was canonized 5 years ago by Pope Benedict. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. A college student from Mississippi is spending her summer in Iraq to help Yazidis, a minority group victimized by ISIS, and she's doing it in an unusual way, through dance therapy. Lauren Ashburn interviewed her earlier.
Lydia Mathis, a dance student studying at Belhaven University in Mississippi, who's working for Samaritan's Purse in Iraq, joins us via Skype. You've been spending your summer there. Tell us, how did you decide to do that, helping the Yazidis?
Oh, wow. So I decided to come here after visiting my sister, who works for Samaritan's Purse in northern Iraq. And this is actually my 4th trip to northern Iraq. And so after being here and seeing the different ways that Samaritan's Purse were responding to the crisis here and helping people who are suffering under ISIS, I decided that there was no better way than to spend my summer here trying to help as well.
We have some pictures showing how you teach dance therapy in Iraq. Why are you doing this? What stories have people told you about the trauma they've experienced and the positive effects of dance?
Yes, so the trauma here that has been experienced by every single refugee who's been affected by ISIS is just unbelievable, really. Every single refugee has had to flee their home and run, and they're now living in camps. And there's so much psychological trauma, a lot of suicidal ideation, a lot of suicidal attempts, a lot of just people who are completely hopeless because they have come from million-dollar homes to living in neighborhoods just like you or I would live in, and now they're living in tents, and the reality is that they may never get to go home, or home may never be the same as it was before. So there's just a lot of hopelessness.
What has been the response to the people you have taught dance lessons to?
Yeah, so my students are all children. They are from the ages 3 to about 15, and they have come into the class, and it's been one of the most surprising things. They've just really dived in and grasped material and really just been willing to try new things and new movement and just express so much joy in that process. And coming here from America and being a college student, I really didn't know how to anticipate their response, but it has been such a joy just to see how excited they are to try new dance classes.
Explain this to me. Dance is all about movement, expressing yourself with your body, but how do you teach Yazidis to be confident with their bodies from a culture that is very modest?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Yazidi culture and Middle Eastern culture in general tends to be more modest. However, dance is this amazing tool because you can teach people things like self-confidence without ever having to use words. And so with my girls, we use a lot of just practicing how to stand and be confident with your shoulders back and your chin up, and how to move with grace and elegance to know that you're an important person in the world, even if everything else seems to be against you.
I think it would be great therapy for anybody who is in a war-torn area or has terrible situations like what you're seeing on a day-to-day basis. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Lydia Mathis of Belhaven University, working in Iraq for Samaritan's Purse.
Thank you so much.
A pro-life advocate who regrets her abortion wants to give alternatives to other women. Kathleen Eaton Bravo is one of the guests tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly.
We have the online virtual clinic and we have the brick and mortar clinics where women can get to know a safe place, a loving place, an alternative to Planned Parenthood. If we do not have alternative comprehensive women's health care clinics. We're going to continue driving women into Planned Parenthood.
Bravo is the president of the Obria Foundation and founder of Obria Medical Clinics. She appears in a special edition of Pro-Life Weekly, recorded in our California studios. You can watch it tonight at 11 Eastern on EWTN. It will re-air on Sunday morning at 10. Well, thank you for watching tonight and for watching all of this week. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Good night, and God bless.